of Chicano art expressions with the purpose to engage in raising the profile of Chicano art. And last but not least, to be announced will be a reception, a Flor y Canto reception, highlighting poetry, highlighting music, highlighting a lot of performance Chicano art expressions at this Flor y Canto. So this is another event to be announced. So stay tuned, and we will continue forth with this plática. So here we are. So this is with this following slide, talking about Ricardo Favela, which is the reason why we are organizing these pláticas. Ricardo Favela, born in 1944 in Dinuba. He's from Tulare County, from Dinuba. So born and raised in Tulare County, and he is alumnus, graduated from the College of the Sequoias in 1965, and transferred to Sacramento State to pursue a bachelor's and also having conferred a master's degree. He was a professor of art at Sacramento State. And so he was a professor of art at Sac State, and also was a co-founding member of the Royal Chicano Air Force. So this was an art collective that was extremely vocal about the desire for Chicano equality and its support for the United Farm Workers movement. So this is Ricardo Favela, as you can see him with his arms open on the bottom of a print that was printed in 1982. And this image of him was taken just a few years before his passing in 2007 here in Visalia, California. And he is, and his resting place is also here in Tulare County in Smith Mountain in Dinuba. So born and raised, and also a place of his resting place. So this is, so Ricardo Favela is a mentor, someone who actually taught serigraphy, silk screening, really mentored a lot of Chicanas and Chicanos in the art of silk screening and making art with a purpose. So this is a reason why we're doing these pláticas. And there will be subsequent events where we will be highlighting different art productions that he produced in his lifetime that are going to highlight different acts, different causes, and definitely United Farm Workers as well. All of this would not be possible without the support of our sponsors that we would like to thank. We'd like to thank California Arts Council, also the Art Consortium, Tulare County's designated art council, the National Endowment for the Arts, College of the Sequoias, Art Gallery, and also Puente, College of the Sequoias. So all of this is done through the support of all of our sponsors and Central Valley Advocacy as well. So we want to just really thank you for the support given for these pláticas and the exhibit. So I wanted to discuss just briefly some, this is a framework. This is a concept of the third root or the tercera raíz. And this is a piece that was produced by Angel Camacho in 2009 that is highlighting the third root, meaning the African root in Mexican culture. So there's European, or white, Spanish, indigenous, and the third root is African root in Mexican culture. So for the most part, what this is framing our discussion for today is looking at the connections conceptually of Mexican independence and also Black Lives Matter. That it's important to have these kinds of discussions because race usually in the United States is discussed along a black and white binary. So with this discussion, acknowledging and highlighting and putting to the center the African roots in Mexican culture is a way to enter into this dialogue. So this is the Mexican Chicano cultural expression of the African diaspora of peoples of culture living in Mexico that are from part of the African diaspora. So even today, so this is a history of African peoples coming into Mexico historically through the transatlantic slave trade, a massive network of human trafficking historically. So we have traces of African peoples coming into Mexico since then, and who are also with us to this day. So over about 2 million self-identifying Afro-Mexicanos who live in Mexico to this day. And very significant is that this year, 2020, is a census year also in Mexico that will be able to track for the first time in the history of Mexico, allow Mexicanos to self-identify as Africano. So we have to wait to see how those results actually surface up and give us a better number in reading of the amount of self-identifying Afro-Mexicanos who live in Mexico to this very day. And as we know, that is very significant because these are the ways how resources are distributed to support communities. So this is at the core, is that the constitutionality acknowledging the existence for the first time of Africanos, Afro-Mexicanos in Mexico. So this is, so the third concept here to frame the discussion. Moving along, looking at this piece here is a painting of Gaspar Yanga. This is a painting part of the NYU Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. This is a painting called San Lorenzo de los Negros. And Yanga was born in 1545 and was part of West African royalty who came to Mexico, part of the transatlantic slave trade, in bondage in the institution of slavery. The story of Yanga represents a spirit of resistance. His legacy of resistance is captured in the mural with the breaking of chains from the bondage of slavery. His rebellion against Spanish colonization began in 1570, where he and his followers killed 23 people, then fled the plantation to the hinterlands in the foothills in the hills of Veracruz. So palenques are these free societies of African and indigenous peoples, quilombos, cimarrones. So Yanga formed a community, a free society of Africanos, Mexicanos, and indigenous peoples living in Veracruz, starting in 1570. Spanish colonizers attempted to subdue Yanga and his followers, but were never able to, even with the force of 500 Spanish troops. In 1632, eventually the Spanish colonial governors decided to call a truce and give property rights to Yanga to establish a community. This town of Veracruz is called San Lorenzo de los Negros, which you can see that ribbon on his left hand. This is the original name of the town of this community that was established. Now the town is called Yanga and continues to be one of the most densely populated areas of self-identifying Afro descendants in the region of Mexico. So Yanga is an early expression of anti-colonialism, which overlaps with the theme of Mexican independence, of being independent from colonization. So early antecedent and one of the earliest victories of rebellion by Africans from slavery. So the next slide here are two iconic Mexican heroes of Mexican independence. And the time frame for Mexican independence is 1811 to 1821. With the first image that I would like to discuss is the one on your left-hand side of Jose Maria Morelos, who was born in 1765 during the colonial era and was deceased and killed in 1815. He was under investigation by the time that he actually got involved in the Mexican independence movement in 1811. He was under investigation because there was questions about his race. Because it came to surface that his mother was actually a free woman of color, a negra, a mulata, possibly a mix of an African and a Spaniard, a mulata, meaning that he was actually a devout Catholic wanting to serve as a priest. And technically, because of institutional racism during this time period, someone of color could not serve as a priest. So during this time of 1811, when he was involved in the Mexican independence movement, he was currently under investigation. So what's really significant about Jose Maria Morelos is that his African roots are often not understood, not expressed, and often unseen. And so highlighting this story, a part of Jose Maria Morelos, is very critical, really critical to bring to the forefront the role of Afro-Mexicanos that were important for the liberation from Spanish domination, for Spanish colonialism. And he played a very key role. He was someone who actually was able to gather and speak on the issues of Africans that were in bondage and slavery during this time period. In fact, he actually created a platform that he and his movement for Mexican independence would eradicate the oppression and the institution of slavery and do away with harsh labor tribute system that indigenous peoples were actually subdued in as well. So as a result of this, he actually was able to gather a larger base of support to continue the fight for Mexican independence until he was captured and executed in 1815. But a very important hero of Mexican independence, an Afro-Mexicano. Next, I would like to focus attention on Vicente Guerrero, who was born in the state of Guerrero. And so this is also a very major important area where currently a lot of Afro-Mexicanos currently live to this day. Vicente Guerrero, his father was Pedro Guerrero, an African Mexicano, and his mother Guadalupe Saldaña was an Indian. So he also is of a racially mixed background of Africano blood, also being part of this Mexican independence movement. He was very important. He actually was victorious. He part of the victorious group that liberated Mexico from Spanish colonization. He was a brilliant military person, and he actually became the second president of the Republic of Mexico in 1829. Something that's very significant about him, of not only just his Afro-Mexicano identity, but also his platform, like Jose Maria Morelos. Vicente Guerrero was the president of Mexico that outlawed slavery in 1829, decades before the United States. And so this actually brought a lot of controversy. His ideas were around liberalism, about freedom, which was questioned by conservative elements that eventually actually had him captured and arrested because of the expressions of liberalism during this time period. Was questionable moving forward on issues that were aligned with the popular masses, issues with indigenous peoples and Afro-Mexicanos as expressed by the act of outlawing slavery in 1829. So these two individuals, popular Mexican icons of Mexican independence, are brought into this discussion as traces of looking at the third root in Mexican culture of a very influential Africano Mexicanos that were key in the liberation of Mexico from the yoke of colonial bondage of the Spanish Empire. So this is raises up questions, and this is put in context to put forth consideration of this third root in the past, to take this in consideration in the present as an educational background to understand for the Chicana and the Chicano today, this third raíz element that is still present with us, and that we should also take in consideration when looking at questions of Blackness within Mexican culture, Chicano culture, and also questions of, of Black Lives Matters and the connections within Mexican and Chicano culture and the tercer raíz that's living within our culture as well. So these are the connections with today's topic. And again, just to briefly touch in. And so now what I would like to do is to bring in our guest speaker. So we are actually having our guest speaker present today, and our guest speaker will remain anonymous. Anonymous because of the level of, for the purposes of safety. So we would like to just ask audiences to be supportive and also take into consideration the external reasons why our presenter is remaining anonymous, because as we know, there's a lot of safety concerns with the activists who are involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. So out of respect for her identity, our presenter will remain anonymous. And at this point, I would like to call our presenter into the discussion. So please, presenter, please identify yourself, tell us who you are, and tell us about this organization that you represent called the Central Valley Advocacy.
Thank you very much, Octavia, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. This afternoon, I will be known as CVA Advocacy or CVA member. I would like to let you guys know a little bit about myself, but of course not my true identity. So a little bit about myself, I'm a business major attending a local community college in Tulare County. And of course, I'm the founder of the Central Valley Advocacy, along with a little bit of help, of course. So art was always a hobby of mine, and I've always been attracted to painting African kings and queens. I'm sorry, I'm so nervous. Oh my God. Art was always a hobby of mine, and I had always been attracted to painting African kings and queens. To paint a woman of color with jewels in her natural hair was so simple, yet made me feel empowered to be a Black woman. I decided to share my art in an event hosted by CVA that I will later discuss. But art to me is a way that I get to speak. It's how I get to use my voice, and it's how I get to represent women of color. Due to the tragic death of George Floyd, I was devastated to discover on social media another African American was murdered at the hands of a police officer with racist intentions. I can't explain my anger and frustration, but there was a dramatic change in the air this time around, and I'm sure everyone felt it. At the beginning of the protest happening in Visalia, I had no hope, in all honesty. We've had protests before, the Black Lives Matter movement has happened before, and people got angry and looted and destroyed things, but nothing truly happened. No change was truly met. I couldn't keep silent anymore after seeing the protest, the largest protest, happening in Visalia, California in late May. I just knew I had to act and do my part in the movement. The fear of being placed at the center of the public eye has and still is an issue to be a young activist. And I would really respect if everyone could acknowledge why I choose to be anonymous this afternoon. So I'd like to let you guys know who CVA is. Our followers on social media know us as BLM Visalia, but the members are known as CVA, meaning Central Valley Advocacy. The Central Valley Advocacy is a nonprofit organization recently developed in the city of Visalia during the Black Lives Matter movement. CVA, also known as BLM Visalia on all socials, is an organization that raises awareness of social injustice, discrimination, including sexism, racism, transphobic, homophobicism, and most importantly, systematic racism happening around the country as well as within our own community. As an organization in full support of the Black Lives Matter movement, our purpose is to promote the voices in the Central Valley, honor the many that have passed due to police brutality, and empower our people of color. We strive to enforce ethnic studies within our educational system, to teach the children of the future to respect one another's differences, even if they choose not to accept them in the end, because the choice will always be theirs and theirs alone. We strive to stand united as a community by hosting art events as a way of healing and empowering our people of color, through art, whether it be visually, verbally, or musically, because we understand a healthy mind accomplishes major objectives. We strive to acknowledge the many who do not agree with what we are fighting for, and preferably include them rather than exclude them, because we understand you cannot fight hate with more hate, just as you cannot fight racism with more racism. Slide, please. This art piece was something I painted during the protest wars, I like to call it. A few of you who actually pay attention to newspapers and news might have recognized this art piece, but I painted this in the hot sun, determined to get it done. I had a few people actually come over to make sure I was okay, because apparently I looked like I was about to pass out. But to those who are attending this meeting that have helped me create this piece and make sure my personal health was okay, thank you very, very much. So the art piece Zawadi was painted on the fence of El Diamante during the hanging of the posters in July. It was just over 100 degrees outside, yet I had to get my message out there. My art piece lasted a few weeks on the fence until they were transported to College of Sequoias. Unfortunately, they were removed a few days before college had started, but of course not without some minor vandalism, including defacing of signs and signs drenched in urine. The term Zawadi itself originated from African Swahili roots, meaning gift. The choice of word was inspired by a close friend of mine who referred to me as Zawadi. It wasn't until I researched the word did I understand what it meant. It seemed appropriate to place the specific word next to the image of a biracial woman because that is what a woman of color is, a gift. For too long, women of color face struggles concerning their hair, skin, and beauty features. The red color of choice is meant to resemble the bloodshed, frustration, and love a woman of color contains, and in most situations, refuses to share, afraid they would not be truly heard or met. Society created beauty standards based off of a person of color's natural features, shaming the natural for their own beauty, until a woman outside of the POC community advertises false full lips and forced coarse hair on social media, creating a trend. For many women of color, they were indoctrinated into hating themselves before they could truly love themselves, and as a Black woman myself, dealing with this was very agonizing. It is frustrating sometimes being a woman of color because what makes you who you are is taken away from you before you get the chance to thrive as a woman of color. Slide, please. This image is not mine, but I will take credit for the photograph itself. The piece of art was not done by me. I cannot take credit for a simple yet powerful message. I will take credit for the photo itself, like I just said. I had taken this image during one of our memorials we host every other Sunday in honor of the many Black and brown we have lost due to police brutality. In our eyes, it seemed most appropriate to host our memorials on the El Diamante fence because the youth made history by protesting their voices to the people that did not believe in racism, transphobia, and homophobia, and sexism that is taking place in our city. A little bit about the image is the flowers captured in the photograph are commonly used during funerals, for instance, as an expression of sympathy, respect, and love. The burning of the candle represents the light in the darkness, signifying the light into the next world for the soul of an individual that has passed. However, the veladoras, which happens to be the burning candle in the image, is a symbol of good faith and a sign of divine life in the Hispanic culture. The fence behind the image might be familiar to some viewers. As it was discussed before, our memorials take place on the El Diamante fence off of the corner of Acres and Wagner Street for an hour and a half. We hang up images on posters of the ones who were lost. We intertwine flowers on the fence next to these portraits, and we light candles at the foot of the fence for the entire memorial service. We allow anyone who joins us to say a few words for the victims' families and remind one another why we are here fighting peacefully for changes to be made in our community. Slide, please. This art piece is located behind Exotic Reptiles on Mooney Boulevard beside the Western Dental Office. This art piece was created during an art event hosted by the Central Valley Advocacy in mid-June. The weather was not in our favor, but the other artist and myself were determined to finish what we had envisioned to be memorable. Visalia Times Delta reporters interviewed a few of the artists during the event, saying we were brave and determined to spread awareness that Black lives still mattered here in the Central Valley. The goal of the art event was to get the media's attention, and of course it would, considering our art was going to be displayed in a public area. Black art was painted, Black and brown unification pieces were created, and a single unity and diversity image was painted as well. Even though at the time Visalia was in the middle of a pandemic, CVA was still proud of the turnout and even more pleased with the art. The art piece created by myself was inspired by African culture because of the obvious afro, extended neck, multiple gold necklaces, and giant hoops hanging off the ears. The multiple colors of green and red and black represent the African flag itself. I've always recreated this image so many times on small canvases, but to actually see this image in public still, left alone and respected, made me feel very proud of what I accomplished. To have so many people literally looking over my shoulder to see what I was creating, to stay with me the whole day to see what the outcome would be was very, very inspiring. And I really, really appreciated all the support that I got. Again, I am a Central Valley Advocacy member, and I strongly encourage anyone who is interested in activism in the Central Valley to shoot us a message on Instagram at BLM Visalia and apply to be a member today, because we do not discriminate. If you want to educate yourself more about what we are doing, please reach out. Thank you.
Thank you, presenter. Thank you very much sharing. Sharing your awesome work and the work that you do in the activism. So let me see. Now we are going to transition at this point. Let's see. We're going to transition at this point to the core of our plática. This is our chance to engage in conversation. So what I would like to do is to encourage those who have a question to use the Q&A box. Use the Q&A box. You can insert your questions in the Q&A box. And this is the way that you're actually going to be able to participate in this plática. So insert your questions. I see we have a question. And so as many of you are actually are in the process of typing up and submitting your questions, I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity to ask the initial question to our presenter, and then we will return. And then also remember that you can do the thumbs up on questions as well, and that would also increase the likelihood of your question being asked to our presenter. So presenter, if you could please respond to the question, what does Black Lives Matter, what does that mean to you?
The Black Lives Matter movement means everything to me, considering I am a Black woman. The Black Lives Matter movement is very empowering to Black people like me. It helps me find my voice, it helps me promote my voice, and it helps me get the message and the pain out. Having the ability to write on a poster what I feel, to empower other Black women by saying Black is beautiful, it's amazing. It truly is. At the protest, you get to reconnect with people and connect with people that you never would have thought you would have in your life. You make friends, you make the right friends, of course, because they have the same political views as you. I can't tell you how many people I've met that I still keep in contact with, because we're all about educating each other, and they're all about listening to me and sharing the same level of respect. I hope BLM lasts for a very long time, and I hope that a lot of people get to heal during this time as well. That's about it.
Thank you, presenter. Thank you. I can hear the sense of upliftment in your voice. The way that you respond to that question really transmits, that meaning. Thank you for answering that question. We have a couple of questions that are coming in the Q&A. So I would encourage you to continue to typing up your questions and submitting them in the Q&A. So we have one that's fairly popular, one by our Lucia Vasquez, Dr. Lucia Vasquez, our committee member. And she's asking, what have you learned, presenter? Could you respond to this question of what have you learned from this experience? What have you learned, and what has surprised you about your experiences of involvement in the work that you've been doing in the Central Valley Advocacy?
Well, I have learned that some of the terms that are being used have a second meaning, or the meaning gets very confused. For instance, ACAB. The term ACAB, all cops are bad, is originally supposed to be all cops are bastardized, meaning the system itself is corrupted. Me, truly, I couldn't stand the term ACAB because I have respect for Black police officers. But considering what's been going on and being further educated by another organization that was kindly enough to educate me about the term, I understood why I am ACAB. I understood why I believe the system is super corrupted and that we need to do all that we can to fix it. What surprised me is seeing so many people actually support the BLM movement in the Central Valley. It was amazing to see people I went to school with that I never even talked to, but I would see at school come out with a poster, hang it up, say hi, support what I was doing. It was just amazing, especially at such a young age. You wouldn't think they'd care about something like this.
It's good. So there's been this whole process of engagement and activism has, there's been a process of learning and relearning different things in this process. So, and we have another question here for you, presenter. And again, get your questions in. And so the question I'm going to read to you, it states, outside of color blindness and white nationalism, what are some vital problems and challenges in Visalia that Visalia faces today?
I would like to focus on the educational system, the lack of the proper education, more specifically ethnic studies. Because we don't have ethnic studies in our or in our schools, students don't respect each other's differences. They don't respect the LGBTQ community. They don't respect Black and Brown. It doesn't seem like anything is the true feelings of other students are taken into consideration. For instance, a lot of events on campus are normalized, like the football events where they would allow football players to dress up as women. Me being innocent and oblivious to what was truly going on, I thought it was hilarious. But then during this movement, I was able to understand why that'd be so offensive to a transgender woman. So things like that are still normalized in our school shows how poor and how our schools don't acknowledge the feelings of their students. It's brutal, and it needs to be changed. There's a lot of changes that need to be made in our educational system.
Interesting, interesting. So focusing on the education that could be done to really raise consciousness and awareness of experiences that aren't really typically the norm then. Excellent presenter. Let me ask you another question. We have a lot more questions coming in on the Q&A, and also just a FYI, if you're still using the chat function, make sure you're using the Q&A function to actually submit your questions. See a lot of chat questions in the chat as well. So now let me see, asking you the next question, presenter. When you said protest wars here in Visalia, what do you mean by that? You also said that you were devastated by looting here, when I never recalled any. I would just like you to expand on that subject with facts and not hearsay what is going on around the world.
Well, I'm very sorry for the confusion. I pronounced poster wars, referring to the El Diamante poster events. I'm sorry if it came out as protest wars. We know that hasn't been happening lately. And I'm very devastated by the looting worldwide because of the incidents that are happening to Black Lives Matter protesters specifically. Even though it's not happening in the Central Valley, it still catches my attention because it's the obvious dangers that come along with being an activist and being a part of the Black Lives Matter movement. What is, yeah, that's my response.
Okay, gotcha. And let's see, we have more questions coming in, presenter. And let's see, we just maybe add to, it's interesting on this question of, let's see. All right, I got you another question, presenter. And oops, it just went away. So for some reason that question, it was, so this is a question. So it's kind of phrased in a form of encouragement too. And so it says, seeing that you would rather remain anonymous about who you are given the dangers that could come with people knowing your identity, what encouraged you to put your fears aside and create the Central Valley Advocacy? good question.
Well, what encouraged me was the large protests that happened in Visalia, California. To see so many people come out in support was amazing. And it did get out of hand a little bit, but that comes along with the frustration that people are having with the constant repetition of repeating themselves and saying that Black Lives Matter, because they do. It's really irritating that there's an All Lives Matter protest, counter protesting Black Lives Matter, because those people are very confused about the fact that Black Lives Matter doesn't just care about Black Lives Matter. They're aware that every other life matters too. But because me as a Black woman, I represent that movement. It's who I am, it's a part of me. But what encouraged me to put my fears aside, I would have to definitely give credit to an organization. I choose not to say their name. I'm not sure if they're comfortable with that. But one of the members, she really encouraged me and inspired me to step out of my comfort zone. She made me feel like it was just our time to speak up, and it was the youth's turn to show everybody what we were capable of doing in this Black Lives Matter movement. Of course, because of some minor complications and differences, I had to branch off and start Central Valley Advocacy.
Awesome, presenter. We have we have several questions. I'm gonna try to connect two of them together with relations to your paintings. We have a question that came in that wanting to know, when did you start painting? And did you always paint with purpose? And then another question dealing with paintings to tie into that is, what future ideas do you have for paintings that are based on these goals?
I started painting about 4 years ago, I want to say. It was just simple stuff until I actually started to be inspired by images on social media, and then my own images, of course. I haven't actually always painted with a purpose. I can't explain it, but I was just always attracted to African art. Like, I just had to draw the beautiful savannah or the afro, the jewels, and the brown skin. I had to. It was just something I really loved to see, and it hung up, of course, in my room. The future goals that I have for paintings, I hope to actually dip my feet into realism. That's been a major goal for the longest. I haven't had the time to actually paint lately because of everything that's going on right now with school and with BLM, but hopefully when I get started into that, I would gladly share that, and you might see it in public eventually.
Awesome. You have the audience who's thanking you for your inspiration, presenter. And a question to follow up on that comment is, what can be done to create greater Black and Brown unity?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes, of course. So the question is, what could be done to create greater Black and Brown unity?
I would definitely say art. I think the beautiful unification of Mexican and African art together, it would be amazing. Like, to see that in public, I think it would create a message. I don't know if anyone has seen a couple of videos, but at a couple of protests, there's a bunch of activists that are tying their flags together, the Mexican flag and the African flag, and standing united because they know that this fight is bigger than just the few of us. We need all of us to stand up and fight for what's right.
Awesome. Great. Let's see, we have, so a question, it kind of ties in, there's a couple of questions that are asking this. They want to know your take on, as a student, what kind of new classes do you think can make students more aware of some of the vital problems we have nowadays? And that kind of ties into another question in terms of like the classes. So this is a question that says like, so what kind of new classes you think we should take There's more questions coming in, and so it kind of changes the format. So give me 1 second. I'll go back to that question I was trying to tie it to. So, okay, so the question is, as a student, what kind of new classes do you think can make students more of the vital problems of nowadays? And this other question that's kind of related is how should we approach topics of anti-Black racism?
So I believe ethnic studies overall would be a great way to get that message out there and include it in our educational system. But to take it a step further, ethnic studies includes the LGBTQ community system, history, I'm sorry. It would be more in depth about African American successors and Black and Brown successors. It would create a sense of empowerment for children. Like me growing up in school, I graduated, but in high school I was just taught about slavery and the oppression and police brutality, and it kind of made me lose hope of ever being successful personally. When you are constantly taught about something that has affected your ancestors for so long, you kind of just feel helpless. But I feel like if we were to add more successors, more people that have created not just change within activism, but people that have been able to step out of the boundaries and become like a successful businesswoman as an African American, or have created something, it would be very empowering for other children of color. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it does, presenter. I think it really highlights also observations that I've had in ethnic studies classes that I teach at COS as well. Like you could see the change, the impact, that it has when students begin to learn more about their ethnic heritage, their background. So it's very uplifting to be able to focus on things, not only like experiences of oppression, but also enriching topics of success and contributions here in the US as well. So let's see, we have more questions coming in, presenter. Let me see. Let's see, we have one question here. It says, quote from MLK to Cesar Chavez. Oh, we have, so here we go. Quote from MLK to Cesar Chavez, quote, "Our separate struggles are really one struggle for freedom, for dignity, and for humanity," end quote. You have mentioned not only being African American, but also a woman. From an African American woman's standpoint, do you feel more people, especially strong women of color, will step up and join the fight for justice?
I can only hope that more women of color will step up. I know that this fear that I have myself, I can't be alone with having that fear of either being, I don't know if anyone has kept up with the news or on social media, but there's been a few lynchings happening across the world. And although that hasn't happened in Visalia, things are getting pretty dangerous, especially with so many people openly expressing how they feel about the BLM movement. So I hope that more women of color do step up, but I really hope that they're very safe with how they involve themselves in the movement.
Let's see, presenter, we have more questions coming in. We have to the presenter, when it comes to Afro-Mexicano, Black Latinx identities, how can movements for Black and Brown lives center those more marginal identities? There sometimes seems to be minimalization of those more unique narratives, and they tend to get left behind. Interesting question.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to think.
This question, I could ask the question again. So the question is coming from this idea of Afro-Mexicano, Black Latinx identities. And I'm thinking it's so it's like the connection of both of them at the same time, maybe even biracial identity, possibly. Maybe that's the way it's meant, or here we have, when it comes to Afro-Mexicano, Black Latinx identity, how can movements for Black and Brown lives center those more marginal identities? So sometimes seems to be a minimalization of those more unique narrative, and they tend to get left behind. I think one that's maybe not in here, but maybe like another would be maybe the trans community as well. You know, the trans community, Black women, trans communities, these kinds of things that are more marginalized within, you know, within the Black community itself, biracialness, these kinds of things.
Well, I would believe that during a protest, create a sign, maybe include those things on the poster. I strongly encourage the Brown community to be a part of I Protest in Visalia because this is their fight too. Even though it is known as the Black Lives Matter movement itself, Black and Brown are stronger together. So I can't exactly answer that question, or I don't know if I answered it enough, but I would definitely say more inclusion, maybe getting, hopefully in future protests, you'll be able to see the Mexican flag more in Visalia, and hopefully we make enough noise and have enough people out there so the news can see it, and so everyone else everywhere can see that Black and Brown should be working together in this protest.
Well done, presenter. We have, let's see, we have a couple more questions. I got one question here that was, I guess it was for me. So the question is for Professor Barajas. Why did it take so long for Mexican government to include Afro-Mexicanos in the census? So just to respond to this question, I want to say that, so this is part of like the national narrative of, so this is, so what occurred after Mexican independence was that there was a creation for a national narrative to create kind of national cohesion. And so it began to try to, it was a process of erasure of the Blackness, of the Black race within Mexico. And so there was also the census, and Mexican government at that time stopped making references to race in official documentation. And this process was done to say that there was equality in Mexico. And so this kind of was saying that everyone is Mexican. And so that, and so it was in some sort of way, it was a sense of post-racial politics, a very early expression of it, or the, you know, attempt to try to foment a national identity by not acknowledging race and saying everyone was Mexican. So that's what happened actually initially after Mexican independence. But then after this, you actually have the further marginalization of Afro-Mexicanos that's happened over time. But also want to make reference to that this is only, this inclusion in the census has been done because many Afro-Mexicanos has been at the forefront of anti-Black organizing in Mexico. And we have organizations that have been active for decades that have been doing this work. And so these, this kind of actions were only made possible even today in 2020 because of this, this work. One nonprofit organization called Mexico Negro. So just referencing that one to look it up. So just a little bit there to add to that, to give you some response to your question. And presenter, we have, I'm not sure if you want to take this question, but we have a question that's fairly popular too, and it's surfacing up to the top, and it states, what are the current steps in Visalia to incorporate ethnic studies in local schools? You want to respond to that one?
Yes, I would love to.
Yeah, please.
So the current steps as of right now, CVA is actually working with the board, VUSD, and we are trying to push for a board meeting so we can discuss the mural project and why we need the Black and Brown mural in our community. And art is very important and it's very impactful to many people, and it carries a very strong message for just an image. So that's our first step. We're encouraging art to be taking place in all our high schools, our middle schools, and eventually elementary schools. And that could create conversation, that could create questions, and it would, of course, bring to light more people that don't agree with it, but that is a perfect opportunity to educate them. So, our very first step is to be talking to the board and to be pushing for it because we need it. It's long overdue.
Awesome. Well, then we have also, there's different efforts that are taking place at the statewide level as well. A statewide level with different policies that have been passed to create a statewide curriculum for ethnic studies. And this would be a model curriculum. So the language is not so strong to make it like a requirement for public education at the statewide level, but there's been steps in that direction. The CSUs to make ethnic studies a requirement. There's also the Fresno Unified School District that recently passed the graduation requirement. There's efforts in other counties, and there's discussions happening here also in Tulare County. So definitely, these things are actually happening. And it's over 52 years that ethnic studies was established, one of the first programs in Fresno State in 1969. So it's been a very long time. Let's see. The question, I think a good follow-up question here, presenter, is there anything our community can do to help support CVA, BLM, and future movements?
I would say get involved as much as you can. I know COVID is still in play, and we are very, very cautious about keeping everybody healthy during our protest. But if you're able to, maybe during our protest, park in the Sequoia parking lot, beep your horn with us, cheer with us at a distance, post about it, post our events. Try to be involved as much as you can to keep it alive, because I honestly don't want this to go away. As much as the violence has very much affected me, I can understand why it's happening. The frustration that Black people have, it builds up. Like me personally, I was able to push it aside because I wanted to be heard rather than my actions being how people judged me. But I can't speak for everyone as exactly why they are being violent, but it's understandable, especially when they're protesting and then the next day, another Black person is killed at the hands of a police officer. So, yeah.
And we have this other question that is, it's moving up. The upcoming election, presenter. How does the BLM movement feel about the upcoming election and the predominantly white two-party system?
Again, I can't speak for the entire BLM movement, but I'm pretty sure people feel uncomfortable. I would say, me personally, I feel very uncomfortable. I have hope that changes are going to happen, but then I have no hope. So it's a 50-50 chance of something could seriously change, something could seriously go wrong. But again, I can't speak for the whole BLM movement.
Gotcha, definitely. Let's see. Let's see. Do you think this time happening now? Let's see. I'm trying to make sure I'm getting the ones that I got a lot of votes. We have a lot of questions that are moving up on the list of the Q&A, and so they're like changing in their ranking. Let's see. And there's a couple of them that have been answered already as well. So this question, presenter, how do you feel about the violence attached to the BLM movements and events nationwide? Why are so many events turning violent?
I somewhat answered that previously, but again, it goes along with the frustration that people have for not being heard. Being peaceful was the way that everyone was able to get their message out there. But then again, another Black person would die at the hands of a police officer with racial intentions, and then things would get out of hand, violence would break because people are tired of dying. Hands up, don't shoot means something. Enough is enough means something. They don't chant that for no reason.
Yes, indeed. Presenter, let's see, we have, there's several of these questions that you've answered, and great job answering these questions. I'm trying to find one that came up earlier, which I think maybe it's gotten a couple of thumbs ups and it's moved up. They change order when that happens. So this question here, presenter, is asking you to consider, I'm very curious as to when in your life or whoever told you as a Black woman in society that you are not beautiful or less beautiful than another race.
It wasn't being specifically told you're not beautiful. It was the signs, the hints. Growing up, I had a bad habit of straightening my natural curly hair because students would come up to me and admire my poofy hair, but then add, but it would look better straight. It would look prettier straight. And because I constantly got that comment, it kind of pressured me into burning my hair and straightening it just to fit in. I noticed a lot of the girls who were having boyfriends at that young age had straight, nice, wavy hair, and I wanted to kind of look like that in hopes of catching attention. So it was just the pressure of fitting in that made me feel like I wasn't enough naturally. On social media, Black women were shamed for having big lips. They honestly tried to make their lips smaller with makeup, and it was just insulting and very sad to see that you couldn't love your natural beauty until it became a trend or until a celebrity of non-color decided to make it a trend.
And let's see. I think we've gotten these answers to these questions. I want to just briefly respond. If you want to jump in this one, presenter, please do. The question is being white not a woman of color? Is white not a color? I'm a mix. I'm a mix of being Mexican Caucasian, but my skin is more lighter. So am I not considered to be a woman of color?
I don't know exactly how to answer that question. I believe if you are Mexican and Caucasian, again, I don't know how to answer this question.
Yeah, that's fine, presenter. If I could have just chime in on this as well with you. So this is a question. So here we have, so when I discussed the concept of the third root, we also have white as one of the roots. Spanish, we have indigenous. You also have African, so blacks. You have these three roots that are also interplaying. But what often happens when you begin to study race and racism, you get to see that white race has a very privileged location when it comes to the discussion of the experiences of race and racism. Even though, so not going through the same experience of being racialized. This makes for a very distinct experience. So, but this question also is taken into account Mexicans. So, you know, this is going to require, like, this is a very personal question that's being made. So it requires some like introspection, some like self-evaluation of checking in on yourself. So it is a difficult question to respond to for that reason. So, you know, where you stand and on that in terms of making that personal evaluation on these questions of race, because there's white Mexicans as well. There's white Mexicans, like Canelo Alvarez, who's white, red hair and freckles. It's a white Mexican. And there's, and then get as white as Louis C.K., who's a white a Jewish Mexican, which many people aren't aware because his race is not questioned. So it's not until maybe you hear an interview that actually surfaces up. Otherwise, they can really, pass without even being questioned. Those are the privileges of whiteness. So those are some thoughts, some ideas to add to consideration there. Let's see. We have some more questions coming in. Let's see. We have a question in, and it says, "I really love your painting so much, but how did it inspire you?"
Well, which painting specifically? We showed, I believe, two.
Okay. Let's see. I'm not sure this. They're not specifying which one of the two.
I don't know which one.
Right. Yeah. It's not worded in a way. It could be. Well, you spoke on inspirations of the last one, right?
Yes, they're both very inspiring to me because I'll just speak about both of them.
Mhm.
But being able to paint a Black woman creates a sense of empowerment, especially to be able to place it in a public area for so many other people to see and to take pictures of. One of my paintings was actually in the news, so having so many eyes on that painting specifically made me feel very proud, and it kind of made me want to continue doing more. For instance, realism, experimenting and learning more about my own culture alone.
We have another question on ethnic studies. We have some comment here that it's stating that, so it's giving us some history, important history here. The Chicano movement in the 60s, early 70s demanded the creation of ethnic studies with some success at Redwood and College of the Sequoias. But over the years, classes have been eliminated or watered down. How could we sustain the need for the continued development of ethnic studies, as well as the history of this struggle? So I would just really encourage, presenter, feel free to jump in here, but I just really would encourage um, that, that the community is involved, and making sure that, we have public institutions, public education involved in actually expressing these interests to these public institutions, having, public officials who are on boards hear your interests, express them, and also, coordinate with other members of the community. I know there's a lot of people in the local community who are sharing these sentiments of understanding the importance of ethnic studies education. So this is good background knowledge that is being placed in this question and answer in terms of how this also has been in the process since the 60s and 70s here in our local context. And so there is continuity in that. There has been different peoples who have pushed forth. And so it's important that these institutions know the interest from the public. So would really encourage to really have your voices heard, have them heard by administrators, and also interact with other people who have your common interest. And so that's something that is really important to happen here at the local level. It's happening at the state level. It's happening at different districts around Tulare County. And so definitely it's also an interest here locally with students who are taking courses at COS with me, are expressing the interest of having it at an earlier age. And so the interest is there. Let's see, we have another question. If you could feel free to jump in on that last one if you like. Let's see, have fundraise, work with the police, stay away. That wasn't a question. It's more of a comment. Um,
I would like to add to Jake Cadena. I think I probably mispronounced your name. The issue, it was really good. The issue of POC is whether it's bloodline or skin color. I take it as skin color. I've been to many countries, though, of my 21 years of service. The one commonality, I'm sorry, I'm so bad at words, was that each country was discriminated against their own people with other than white skin. I can agree with that. Colorism is extremely bad. I'm actually a student of Octavia's, by the way. I'm taking his Black American Studies class, and I'm actually found the term for discrimination with your own race, which is colorism. So I have personally experienced that with darker skin tone African Americans and, of course, Mexican, because I am both. I'm African American and Mexican American, so it's very difficult to feel some sort of acceptance between the two. Because truly, I don't officially feel like I belong on one or the other. I have to be in the middle. So, yeah, that's very true. Discrimination within your own people, it's heartbreaking.
And maybe thinking about now the context of college campus, if you could respond to the following question, thinking about your experience at COS, how important is it to see the college create spaces for marginalized student groups to gather and support each other through their higher education?
That's actually very important. I've only been this is my first year at COS, so I would love to push for that when everything kind of calms down for me. But I think it's very important to include some sessions like that for students so that they can better connect with each other, create conversation, and have those uncomfortable conversations, especially to create change in their community. But yeah, it's very, very important. I would personally try to push that more to high school and middle school to attack the younger ages so that we can catch them early and help them understand what racism is and why it exists.
Hmm. Presenter, you've been doing a great job with all these questions, and they keep on coming in, and we're still going. It is it's 8:20. We still have a couple more questions. Are you up for another question, presenter?
I would take one more question.
One more question. Okay, so we have another question coming in, and let's see. You have so this question is there also an effort to create space for members of the broader Latinx community on campus who are not Mexicans? If so, is it mindful that, for example, the Salvadorians are not reduced to being perceived as different kinds of Mexicans? Want to take that question, presenter?
I'm not so educated about this. I would love for you to take some of it.
Okay, I'll get back to that question. We have another question coming in, and maybe you want to take this one, okay? And it's so it's a good question. So, can the presenter artist talk about her cultural heritage? What customs, culturally significant ideas did her family celebrate or discuss when she was growing up? These ideas about race often overshadow the importance of a person's heritage. Personally, I have always felt that my cultural heritage defined my identity more than my race. A previous questioner was concerned about being Mexican, Caucasian. My son are Mexican, Caucasian. My cultural heritage that my wife, my family pass on to them will hopefully define their identities more than their race. So that's a question with a comment to take into account. So now the question is, talk about cultural heritage. It just moved up. Where'd it go? Someone bumped it up with the like. So, all right, here we go. So the question is, what customs or cultural significant ideas did your family celebrate or discuss when you were growing up. So to talk about this question of cultural heritage.
Well, let me find the question. Sorry, it disappeared again.
It has one like, and
Yes.
it's moved up in that bracket of.
There you go. So my cultural heritage, all I can say is that I'm African American and Mexican, and unfortunately, I don't get to celebrate the culture. I don't get to deeply learn and get the opportunity to know where I came from, who. It's very upsetting. My family has no idea where we came from, and the educational system definitely doesn't help out with me finding out where I originated from. So I can't answer that question. We don't celebrate anything. It's very upsetting. The closest thing I've been able to celebrate was Dia de los Muertos, my favorite holiday. But that's like barely scratching the surface of what I should know.
Presenter, thank you so much for responding to the great amount of questions this evening. We have over 70 people still with us on this Zoom, and really would just like to end this Q&A and also move on to a couple more slides just to remind you of events that are coming up. So these are, the next one will be on October 22nd, so please mark that on your calendar. We want to thank you all for joining in the conversation. Presenter, thank you so much for your responses, pensive responses. I want to thank everyone on the committee, the Ricardo Favela committee, for making this possible, all the hard work that went into making this a reality. So stay tuned, and we look forward to the next event on October 22nd. And again, one last thank you to the sponsors. Without the support, this would not be possible. So, so this is going to bring our Zoom conversation, our plática, our first plática in a series of pláticas. So stay tuned, everyone. Again, we thank you so much for all of your participation, spending your evening with us. So have a good evening, and everyone be safe. All right. So muchas gracias. Que pasen muy buenas noches y feliz día de la independencia con una conciencia de raíz africana.